Hello kids, this is Mr. Whistler with your video lesson of the day. Today's lesson is going to be on the early days of the war, the Battle of Bull Run, or the Battle of Manassas, as the Southerners called it, and it happened on July 21st, 1861. Now we have a couple of vocabulary words, and our first one is rebel. And a rebel was a Confederate soldier, or you could also call them a Southern soldier, and they wore gray uniforms. And our second word is Yankee, and a Yankee was a Union soldier, or you could also call them a Northern soldier, and they wore blue uniforms. No, you don't need to write these words down because these are repeat vocab words. All right, so before we start, I'm going to give you an overview of the battle and kind of give you a little bit of basic information. Now, before we start, I want to tell you that both sides, the North and the South, had a different way for naming their battles. Now, the North named their battles after the nearest body of water. And in this particular case, there was a little stream called Bull Run. So the Northerners named this battle the Battle of Bull Run. Southerners named their battles after the nearest town, and the nearest town was Manassas Junction. And so the Southerners named this same battle the Battle of Manassas. Now, it's kind of interesting what happened here. At the beginning of this war, both sides were very inexperienced. The soldiers had never really fought before, and they really didn't know what they were doing. And so because of that, they made a lot of mistakes. But both sides, the North and the South, thought they were going to win. They were both confident they would win, and they were both confident that they would win quickly. So when the people of Washington, D.C. found out there was going to be a battle, they really were curious and they wanted to watch it. So they dressed up in their fine clothes and they packed a picnic lunch, they loaded up their carriages, and they drove over to Manassas to watch the war like they were going to a baseball game. Well, as they got there, they had to cross Bull Run, and there was a little stone bridge, and as they crossed it, they fanned out on both sides of the bridge, and they were up on a hill, and they could kind of overlook the battlefield and watch the war. Well, at first, they were really excited because the North was winning the war. And they were having a good time. They were chewing on their chicken, and it was an exciting time for them. Well, at some point during the day, the tide of the battle changed, and the Southerners started winning the war. And it kind of made the crowd nervous, and the Northerners started to retreat, and at first their retreat was orderly. And when the spectators saw the army starting to retreat, they started to try to get out of there. And then all of a sudden, the Northern retreat turned into a panic. The soldiers threw their backpacks down, threw their guns down, and started running. And when they ran into the spectator crowd trying to get out of there as well, it turned into chaos. Now, had the army been a little more experienced, they would have pursued the Northern army, and they probably could have gone all the way to Washington, D.C. and taken Washington, D.C. on the first day of the war because there was nobody there to protect it because all the soldiers were running back to it. So, now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the details. Here's a picture of the spectators watching the war. All right, so it happened on July 21st, 1861. It was a Sunday. It was the first major battle of the war. And the Union troops were commanded by General Irvin McDowell, and he had 35,000 inexperienced troops. And the Southern troops, there were two commanders. Joseph E. Johnston was the overall commander, but he wasn't on the scene at the start of the battle. So he wasn't officially the commander, even though he was a higher rank. He had 12,000 inexperienced troops, and P.G.T. Beauregard, the actual commander, had 20,000 inexperienced troops. So if you add the Southern troops together, they had 32,000 versus 35,000, which was pretty even. Right now, these battles get kind of confusing because you can't just look at a still map and kind of see the battle. So what I have here is I have a video of kind of the troop movements of the battle, and it's a couple minutes, and I just kind of want to watch you to see how the battle kind of transpired.
July 1861, General McDowell pushed his army westward to confront the Confederate force. Beauregard fell back to a position where he could defend the vital railroad junction at Manassas while protecting the roads to Richmond. Covering a 6-mile front, Beauregard defended the crossings of a meandering stream called Bull Run. McDowell sent Union Division Commander Daniel Tyler on a reconnaissance mission toward Blackburn's Ford. Israel Richardson's brigade advanced upon and encountered stiff resistance from Confederate troops under James Longstreet. Tyler's repulse convinced McDowell he should cross elsewhere. Meanwhile, in the Shenandoah Valley, General Joseph E. Johnston slipped away from Union General Robert Patterson. Johnston's troops marched to the Manassas Gap Railroad, where they boarded trains for Manassas. It was the first time that troops were rushed to a battlefield by rail. This movement placed the Confederates on equal numerical terms with the Union Army. On the morning of July 21, 1861, McDowell again advanced Tyler's division toward Bull Run, this time to occupy the Southerners in his front, while 13,000 Union soldiers in 2 divisions conducted a circuitous flanking maneuver. This column of inexperienced and exhausted soldiers crossed Bull Run and Cat Harpin Run and emerged at Sudley Springs on the flank and rear of the Confederate Army. As the head of the Union column approached Matthews Hill, Confederates under Colonel Shanks Evans moved to stop the Union advance. South Carolinians, Louisianians engaged Rhode Island troops, and it's intense. The Confederates, although outnumbered, actually attacked the Union position. Both sides bring more troops into the fight. Confederates under General Bernard Bee arrive and extend the Confederate flanks. Ultimately, Union troops are able to bring more infantry and more cannons to the fight, and the Southerners are forced to fall back to Henry Hill. As disorganized Confederate soldiers reformed on the backside of Henry Hill, fresh troops arrived. General Thomas Jackson's brigade of Virginians formed the heart of the Confederate position. Jackson bolstered his line with 13 short-range cannons. After hours of delay, the Union Army finally moves toward Henry Hill. 11 cannons under Captains Charles Griffin and James Ricketts take position on both sides of the Henry House. This will be the focal point of the battle. The Confederate artillery is well positioned for this short-range fight, and they decimate the Union artillerymen and their battery horses. Union infantry support arrives only to be pushed back by the Confederates, with Jeb Stuart's horsemen riding into their midst. Charles Griffin moves 2 cannons over to enfilade the Confederate line, but before he can open fire, the Confederates attack and capture the cannons. The Union counterattacks and recaptures the guns, and henceforth, this will be an infantryman's fight, with both sides vying for possession of the Union cannons. The Union launches several bloody assaults and get weaker as the day goes on. The Confederates are only getting stronger. They bring fresh troops to the field and extend their lines beyond the Union flank. By the time the last Union reinforcements arrive, they move on to Chin Ridge and find they are already outflanked and outgunned by the Confederates. The Southerners are able to easily push these troops off the battlefield, and they retreat along with the rest of the Union Army.
All right, so at the beginning of the battle, the Yankees were winning, as you could see. And they pushed the rebels back with a ferocious charge. And at some point in the battle, Colonel Thomas Jackson's line was about to break. And he said, "We'll give him the bayonet," or something close to that, which inspired his men to hold their ground and hold their lines. Back in these days, they fought in lines, as you can see in this picture, and if those lines broke, you're going to lose. So they held their lines. Now, General B, on a different part of the battlefield, was in the same situation, and his line was about to break. And he saw Jackson over there, their line holding, and he said to his men, "Look at Jackson, holding out like a stone wall." And that inspired his men to hold their line. So Jackson, seen leading his men heroically, was from then on known as Stonewall Jackson because he held his ground and did not retreat as the Union forces attacked. So the Confederates surged forward, and when they did this, they started screaming. It's already scary enough when soldiers are coming at you with guns, but then when they're screaming, it makes it worse. And this became known as the rebel yell, and they kind of did it all the time after this. And they began to push the Union forces back. And here's a painting of the retreat that we talked about at the beginning, and how the Union soldiers and the spectators are all running into each other, and it's total chaos. So the Union troops retreated. It was orderly at first, and then it turned into a stampede when they ran into the panicked civilians, and they ended up dropping their guns and they began to run. You can see from this picture, this is kind of how the battle ended. You can see the retreat over here. All right, so casualties means three things. It means killed, wounded, or missing. So the Union had 460 killed, 1,124 wounded, and 1,300 missing or captured. The Confederates had 387 killed, 1,582 wounded, and only 13 missing or captured. So what decides if you win a battle or not? What decides is who is left standing on the battlefield. So the Union troops retreated and left, so the Southerners won the first Battle of Bull Run. Now, the Confederates won the first battle, but were too inexperienced and disorganized and weakened to pursue the retreating Yankees. Had they done so, they probably could have taken Washington, D.C. on the first day of the war. This was a shock for the North, and after Bull Run, in these early days, both sides realized that their hopes for a short war were unrealistic. Now remember, before this battle, both sides thought they were going to win, and both sides thought it was going to be a short war. After this first battle and all this blood that was spilled, they realized they made a mistake, and this was going to be a long, bloody war. So the significance of the Battle of Bull Run. It was the first major battle, and it proved that the war would not be short or bloodless, and that both sides were willing to fight. After this battle, Lincoln called for more volunteers, and he signed 2 bills requesting funds for 1 million soldiers. Thousands of people came. This guy, George B. McClellan, was appointed head of the Army of the East, which they called the Army of the Potomac. So he's going to be the overall commander of the Union forces. And so for the next 6 months, probably, both armies, the Confederates and the United States Army, would train. And that is your lesson. I want you guys to complete the note taker. I want you to draw a picture of Stonewall Jackson and put it in your notebook. And then I want you to complete this writing. Before the war started, both sides thought it would be a short war, that their side was easily win. After the first Battle of Bull Run, how did this way of thinking change? Explain. Thank you guys. I hope you guys learned something. And this is Mr. Whistler signing off.